Welcome back to Giselle Open Sourced. I'm Giselle and this is episode 10. This week, the theme of the week has been me versus me. In the last couple videos, I had been developing my own system as well as clearing out that messy transition from being sick to getting back to working on my projects and then realizing I actually can't work as efficiently as I'd like because I hadn't completely dusted off, cleared out what I needed to before I could get rolling without any friction. That being like a clean space, a system that supports me and my various projects. And the last week I feel like I got to a point where I cleared out all of that mess physically, mentally, and set up a system for myself that works. I have physical manifestations of everything that's going on inside of my mind, and that offloads a lot of the cognitive work of holding on to and remembering things. And the me versus me part comes in where I'm putting these systems into practice and I'm seeing that the goal is to check all the boxes for the minimum of, as I've discussed before. But then this is where that conversation around stability and freedom comes in, as I talked about, I think it was 2 episodes ago, in the probability of success. I have been implementing these systems, and this last week was refining where I was and where I want to be in terms of these habits every day. And in that, I realized that I had been running 2 different systems at the same time. I was expecting, I guess, like a type A, type B, an early bird lifestyle with night owl habits. And part of that early bird motivation is now that I am focusing on external action, that means participating in society and society's rules, being the workdays 9 to 5. People are doing work during that time. So if you want to engage with people that are on that time, then I also have to work in that. And before it was easier when I was in the creation process because I could use my night owl habits and just stay up late and work whenever I wanted. But now that I am in the public execution mode, I wrote that in one of my letters, and it's like a double entendre. Here I am in front of the public eye, executed. The last week is figuring out me versus me and making it just me. So filling the gap between those 2 different versions. The decisions are easier when you know what identity you're working from. So this week I was just meeting myself at each moment. It might not have been perfect, and the point is not looking at the result, but looking at the intention and thinking behind it. And from there, I was able to rework my process to support myself to get me to the result that I'm looking for in terms of my daily habits. And I do have a high expectation for myself in the sense that I would like to complete these every day and meet my minimum consistently. And that's kind of the challenge also that I found last week, is I am great at finding the gap between things, but I also want to spend more time acknowledging the progress and the gaps that have been filled. And I think that makes gratitude easier, and that keeps gratitude at the forefront of what you do, is grateful for what you have, the resources, and where you've come from and where you're going, the ability to go there. My natural rhythm is to be a night owl. I have a tendency towards staying up later than waking up earlier. And it came down to, what do I want and how much do I want it? And that comes with the stability again. And as I'm focusing on external action, I'm working within those societal expectations of working from 9 to 5 office hours. I'm giving up my freedom in my time and habits and flow to fit in within societal structures as I'm creating something that is existing within society. I also had an interaction at Costco this week. I was going to pump my gas and I went to the pump and there were 2 people one in line and one pumping, but they were at the pump in the back. As you know, there's like 2 and the front one was empty. And I saw that the car behind the guy that was pumping, he was older, was waiting. And so I thought, it's empty. I'm gonna wait and see if this person is going to take it. Otherwise, I'm assuming they're wanting to wait for the old man to go. And so I waited. They didn't go. I waited probably a minute. And then I pulled forward and I get out of my car and I hear, that was fucking rude. And I look at the guy, I was like, what? Because at first I was like, I think it's also my mode of interacting. I really am not reactive. If anything, I am curious. So I think that's the mode I took with this. And he was like, what you did just now, you pulled in. And I honestly didn't understand it, but I didn't really care to understand because one, there wasn't really a logic behind it, and the way he was approaching me, like, sir, we're at the Costco pump. You can't really yell at me like that, let alone curse at me. And what I really took away was I have experience being yelled at by adults and older men. So that really wasn't much of a surprise for me. If anything, I handled it so calmly. But what really stuck with me was I was just bewildered. I couldn't understand just the thinking behind yelling at someone and approaching something like that. Also because he had pumped his gas. I don't know what he expected us to do. 2 cars waiting behind him. But I just told him, I was like, I waited. And he didn't say anything. And he just got in his car and left. And I just was thinking about it, and I thought, I considered the person in front of me. I considered whether that person that was pumping would be leaving. And yet when I decide to make a decision for myself based on the external conditions, I was then met with an upset reaction because what I did wasn't what that person wanted. I really don't understand. But then it reminded me of this YouTube video I had seen about the integral theory. I will link it in the bio, or I'll link it in the caption. I'll link it in the box below. The integral theory is essentially capturing human wisdom comprehensively in 4 different quadrants. The first along 2 axes, the first one being internal, external, and the second being collective and individual. And after watching that video, I can see where my own personal journey has brought me from the internal collective to now where I am focusing on external action, embodiment, engaging with the world and actually creating something and making something in the world. And I think that's what makes it confusing for me, is as someone who does take the collective experience to heart. And someone who does not care about the collective would find it easy to yell at someone, a stranger, about something that does not matter. And then it just brought me back to the reason why I write and why I share what I do is for my own. It began with my own initial concern for the collective. I wanted to share insights with universal wisdom, and as I've developed my own perspective in that, I can see how I used to write more from the collective, and now my writing is individual, external, and that's me having my own voice, an individual. That's not just an idea, but something that is defined by me. The things that I say and speak about, they may sound simple, but I mean them with high and low level. So writing for the internal collective after studying the external collective, and now really creating art. And that's the shift that I had in the way that I see the way I write the copy for letters. Is before I had the idea of how can I translate this for someone to understand that is interested in this product. And now rather than thinking about the external collective, I can write from an individual internal, being just my own unique perspective on the world, not filtered through the collective. I'm not worried about translating or being received or understood. And I think that's why the tone of this video is going to feel different. Is I had that conversation with my friend, I think it was video 2, about the creation process and feeling like it has to be clear in order to be shared. And really the value, I can share it so clearly for someone, but they may receive it so differently than from what I intend. And now I see the value in just sharing my ideas in the way that I can and the way that interests me. And however people decide to receive that, at the least I shared these concepts, ideas, and you have something to play with, something that might change the way you look at the world. Quote that I have for myself for this week is, my expression filtered for the collective, but power and unique perspective. Why I write was for the collective. a universal wisdom from my lens, and now it's my embodied wisdom from my individual internal perspective. I'm not catering to external expectations in terms of how ideas need to be composed or shared, and there is a freedom in that. I am excited to share from this perspective of just allowing myself to express myself as I am. And before, I used to try to mold it into what could be understood, and that will be what I'm going to implement for letters, is my own writing voice. Before, I was writing copy, and I'll get into the business stuff, but I was writing copy from the mindset of how they would teach you in business school, the customer's perspective, keeping ideas impactful, show the immediate value. And that's still true, but I can do that in a different format other than what you're used to seeing from businesses. I can write my copy as poetry, the way that I naturally speak, rather than trying to appeal to a different audience that isn't interested in my actual voice. And I think that also makes it stand out that much more. That's the embodiment of the product in the way that I'm even sharing it, is I am myself, and if this resonates, this is for you, especially in the form. So I'm excited to implement that. So thank you, old man at the pump, for yelling at me and swearing at me. I needed that I don't give a fuck. And really, I showed that to myself, and also made me grateful for the experiences that I did have in the past, having conflict with older adults and being treated in a similar manner. Before, I felt like, wow, that is so not okay to treat people that way. And now I realize, as someone who is building a platform and wanting to reach large audiences, how would I survive in a world without the ability to hold space for critique without letting it affect me, without letting it even raise my heart rate? I was genuinely so calm through that there was no threat registered, maybe because he was older, but at the same time, I was ready to yell or cry, and I did. I said, what? I waited, and then the attendant at the pump passed by, because I think he either saw the conflict or he just happened to pass by. But I flashed a smile at him. Thank you, though. And let your haters be your motivators, in the sense that they can teach you how to deal with the worst of it without any real consequences. Can't hurt me, can't touch me. On the business end, I have a marketing campaign in the works for letters upcoming. I don't want to give too much detail because that's the point, is the campaign. I want it to be experienced. So I'll report back once that's in motion. And a new direction for the copy on the site, as well as in my packaging. I think before it was a lot more instructional, and I want to create more of a world. Just having that permission for myself to write as I am will allow me to step into my own world. And this understanding of the copy came from a new perspective on my writing. I really never considered myself a writer, nor do I now. I think for me, I mostly consider myself an artist. Well, first, human. I think every human is an artist, and any identity that you decide to bring on is only a facet. So really, I'm not ever just one thing. I'm everything and nothing at the same time. I choose what I present. I choose what I do. And I guess part of why I didn't see myself as an artist that uses words, aka a writer, is because I didn't initially begin with the intention to create anything with my words. They just started coming to me. I think it's the way that I process the world, which is how I now understand my writing, which is conceptual minimalism. Conceptual minimalism is a way of writing that focuses on the purity of the concept and the process as the art. So there are, what people typically think of with writers is people that write books, so long form and very, very textured around human lived experience. And my writing is liminal and simple and short. And so I thought of my poems as tweets, and that's what they were for some time, until I realized, I'm writing a lot of these little things that are starting to create a body of work. And from there, I realized this is my form of poetry. I haven't come across any other poets that are as succinct as I am with my poems. But now knowing that my style is conceptual and minimalism, it feels like having the language gives me the permission to do it proudly. It almost feels validated, but mostly just having the understanding that this is real and has value. Because thinking from the perspective of poems that are longer and just focused on the physical experience here, and after looking into conceptual minimalism, I also found that the process is considered part of the art. And on the personal end, I came up with a better system for my laundry. I used to just do all of my laundry at once. One, because of my cycles, I wouldn't really reset between them, and so things would just pile up as I was going. And that's what brought me to realize I need to focus on my personal well-being before my business projects. And so then I did that. But the laundry cycles still would go to max and then 0. So I would do all of it at the same time. And now I'm realizing all I need to do is, in order to be at 100%, my margin can only be from 100 to 95%. So I only have to put in energy to go to 100 from the 95%. That means instead of doing huge tasks at once, just doing little by little. Isn't that so crazy? So now I'm doing one load of laundry at a time, and I'm doing it in cycles. So I only start the next load of laundry once the first one has been put away. So that means when I do laundry, it will be put away. And if it's not, I only have one load of laundry to put away. So that has been a huge development in the last week on the personal end. And in case you haven't noticed, I also now have the journals that I was talking about last week that were coming in. The idea here is to have a physical manifestation of my projects. Everything else is a physical manifestation of my ideas and internal world. What I needed it for is just to keep track of my tasks day to day, because I have my dynamic calendar, but that's for when to do tasks. And it only gives me a window, and I want to have the scope of anything that needs to be done, so I can then have a list that I can be adding on to the dynamic calendar. And so far I am loving it, especially because how easy it was. The biggest cost just being the moleskin cahiers. I've got 4 in here. I made it all with scraps in the studio. I recycled one of the letters from the September letters from Giselle. I love how it came out. One, because it does have a function. I am using these and they each have a purpose, but it's also made with all of my values. One, efficiency, reusing things. I have had these rubber bands forever, but I knew if I ever need one, I'd rather have one than have to go to the store and buy a whole bunch and not use all of them. So I had 4 that worked for this. It's simple, it's just a cover, but it works great. You can also flat lay, and you can make it at home. It's open sourced. And really, if you wanted to, you could make the inserts, and once the insert is finished, you can replace it. So my focus isn't so much of having something that's long term, more so just something I can rotate and keep updated. So I'm loving using this so far, and this is personal developments. I also want to emphasize the importance of physical manifestations of what you are working on. Everything that we do in this world is physical. It has a physical aspect to it. Even with my ideas, I understand that they exist in the non-physical, but they also exist in the physical. And this is how I bridge them, is by creating a place where they can exist, that I can visit, that I can see, that I can develop physically. So yeah, that's what I'm on. I saw a video that was about making your own journal ecosystem, and I mostly watch these videos, and I guess this is how I consume most things, is just out of curiosity. It's not that I particularly care about the execution, but more so the thought process behind the video. And the video was how to create your own journal ecosystem. So I wondered, what does this person, especially because it had more views, what does this person define as an ecosystem? How do they create a system? What in the system resonated with this large amount of people? So I'm studying, I guess. And I really liked this framework that she had, which I think could be applied to just creating any kind of system. Just having 3 conditions that exist and are fulfilled, but if you can use them intentionally, you can create something that works for you because you are making choices that support what you need, and those being function and feeling. I'll go over that with this. The form. It's small, it's pocket sized. I don't need that much page size. I just need lines to put down tasks. It's also square because I'm using it for checkboxes, as well as just a free form to be able to write. So it's less restrictive than lined paper, but a little bit more structured than a bullet journal. So that's the form. The function, it is, and I learned this term, MECE is a phrase used in consulting, I guess. And I'm realizing the realm I'm in is systems thinking. So MECE is MECE, is mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive, meaning each of these parts has a purpose, but those purposes do not overlap. So each notebook, if I removed one, this would not be MECE because I would not have all of the needs covered. And if I ended up using a book for 2 purposes, it's not mutually exclusive because the purposes overlap. So that's part of the function. I don't know, I guess that might just be the way that I see the world, is through the lens of MECE. I appreciate efficiency, clarity, and simplicity, and that shows in the way that I write. I learned about spatial thinking and sequential thinking. So there are 2 different modes of thinking. One, in my perspective, I think is the natural way to exist, to embody your physical self. As I said, we exist in physical space, so it only makes sense for us to experience and understand the world from a spatial understanding, but it's not the common way to think. This kind of thinking is associated with artists, mystics, people that are existing outside of rigid structures, and that's where the sequential thinking comes in. That kind of thinking benefits having to do tasks, having to do things that are divided 1, 2, 3. And how I came across this is I just understood that there was a friction between the way that I think and then the way that I express. And part of that is, going back to the quote, the way that I filtered myself for the collective, to be able to be received, to be understood. And expressing myself in that manner had friction because I had to translate between spatial thinking to sequential thinking. So I had to, with what spatial thinking is seeing the full picture, seeing it all at once, how those components interact. And when I would translate to sequential thinking, I then had to break it down. And that's why I noticed is because that's where the synthesis would almost break my brain. I would confuse myself because I don't see threads separately. And so what it feels like is putting a picture, like a paper, into a paper shredder, and it turns into all those different little pieces, but then having to put those pieces together and not forget where the pieces are, holding all of them at the same time, rather than just naturally expressing myself from this spatial thinking. And that's why I'm doing this video, is just allowing myself to jump across threads and trust that I will make my point when it's made and it will be received if it is. So less restraint on my messiness because it's not a mess. It just, the world expects things to be fed to them. And the interesting part there is that sequential thinking, this is a recent development in human behavior, beginning with the, well, not beginning, but prominently around the Industrial Revolution, which was when manufacturing lines were made by Henry Ford, a process to create one product divided amongst multiple people, so one person would only have one step. And this is important because it was the beginning of the alienation from our individual labor. When people go to work, they are creating something that they are not particularly invested in, besides, I have to be here to do this thing. to make my money. And part of the alienation of labor is that the individual does not know how to create the product because they only are involved in one step. Before, you'd have people that are specialized that would create things by hand from beginning to end. And when I first learned about this concept in business school, it was a business frameworks class, I didn't quite understand. I understood the cultural impact and human psychology behind the alienation of labor, but I didn't quite understand the impact in the way that we create, which is a process. And if you are not involved in the process, how will you be changed? The change comes not from the end product, but from the process itself. And that goes back to the conceptual minimalism. My poem can be 15 words, but the value isn't in the words, but it's the experience that it takes you through. And with conceptual minimalism, because the meaning is so concentrated, you have to deeply understand each of the concepts in order to fully grasp the depth in those 15 words. And that's the process that changes you, not the 15 words themselves. I can put together 15 words. Does that matter? No, because it's the process that changes me, that changes the reader. So those are the highlights of the last week, me versus me. And I'm no longer two, I'm becoming one. I'm not changing myself for the external in terms of my expression. I'm also no longer between two different identities. I'm gonna change the media of the week to food for thought. The videos that inspire me and change the way that I think I'll include in the box below. But to leave off, I will leave you with some food for thought, beginning with the cost of compliance, the time and physical sacrifice for seeking approval. When you do things for the external approval rather than your own internal power, there is a gap. And that's what I was feeling with the translation between what I am and what I try to be for the external understanding. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that there is a cost of compliance that is physical, that you lose time, you physically have a higher cognitive load. How much do you value the external approval versus your own internal acceptance? Second, acknowledging reasoning versus the choice. And this is more in regards to children, and also with my ideologies, it's collective. It is for all the ages. It is generational. It is complete. And this is more relevant when it comes to children, but I think it still has value for everybody. And acknowledging the reasoning versus choice. When a child, someone that's learning something, is engaging with you and you are partnering with them in their experience, rather than acknowledging the product, you can connect with them by acknowledging their reasoning. And so that way you validate their internal experience rather than the way that they show up in the world. And that is the difference between someone that is unique and expresses that uniqueness in the world versus someone that performs for the world, creating for others rather than from themselves. And that concludes the video. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next week.